Hi, I'm Dave Dinkle here tonight with Wayne, and Wayne's going to talk along with me about a deal we just finished as a partnership, sort of. The purpose of it, though, is to talk about it's a probate and the kind of things that can happen during a probate. And I talk in my book and some other places all the time about partitioning an estate, and that's what had to happen to make this work.
Right.
So, Wayne, anything you want to say before we start?
I'm just glad I have you as a mentor, really.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's go back.
That's always the case.
Let's go back in time. This started almost a year ago, or more than a year ago.
Yes, a little over a year ago, yes. And I sent some marketing out to a lady. There was a house in West Park that was part of my marketing, and she responded to the marketing. And so the issue there was, though, that her decedent relative of hers passed away, so it's a probate. The person I was working with owned half of the property, or had interest in half the property, and the other person who I didn't know of until later on in the process had the other half.
Okay, let me explain that because I think it's kind of interesting. In this case, what happened is there was a husband and wife. Each of them had a separate will.
Yes.
And they were probated separately. Now, the reason I say that is because I did a probate a few years ago, and what happened is the person on title, let's say his name was John Smith, that was his dad's name. He was John Smith Jr., but he lived in a house.
Mm-hmm.
And his father had died, then his mother died. He had a brother. His brother died. Before he died, he was divorced. He had 2 children. It took us 364 days to finally settle up and actually be able to buy the thing. And here's a good example of it happening again. So here we have 2 probates ongoing, one from the adversarial side and one from your side. How long did it take until she actually signed the contract with you?
She signed the contract after responding to the marketing. It was a matter of days, maybe 2 days. She was on it. She wanted to sell. She didn't have any idea that she could get anything from the property because it belonged to her father. She was the only heir. And so when I explained the process to her, she said, yep, just send whatever I needed to send to her email. She signed it pretty much the next day and sent it right back. Sent a death certificate as well, a 24-hour mail. So she was ready.
This is too good to be true, right?
Yeah, but you know what they say about things that are too good to be true.
So now, out of curiosity, what did you offer her at that time?
Oh boy, I think it was looking at the value at the time, which was lower than what it is now, and working in profit and some things that just really, probate things, other things that you maybe can't account for. I offered her something like 70 or 75.
Okay. Now, the after repaired value of the property was what? Do you remember offhand what it was in the time?
At that time, it was, I think, 210.
Okay. And your thought process is, well, you're going to look for half of the house and 70 to 105 or whatever, the other half, there's a spread in there. But lo and behold, there are some complications that came up.
Yes. What happened was we were able to, after some time, complete the probate for the side that I was associated with. I did reach out and have been reaching out through prior marketing to the other side. No response. But now that we have control of one side, I reached out a little bit more aggressively to get the other half to respond. That other side responded. I went to see the property, developed a good rapport with the other half interest, that lady, who is, I forget how she was related to the decedent. And then she had 2 children as well. And it turns out that she was ready to sign the contract, only to find out that she had signed a contract previously with another investor. And that kind of threw a monkey wrench into things.
Now, the other investor's contract was for...
I think it was 220.
Yeah, it was 220. Okay. Not that I have the greatest memory in the world, but the number comes up in my mind. So now we have a contract on half of the property for 220 because that investor's thinking he's getting the whole thing.
The whole thing, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a contract on half of it for 70.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
So the issue here was that neither probate had been completed.
The probate on our side was completed. The probate on the other side was not.
Okay.
It was started, but it wasn't completed.
Yeah, it was started 3.5 years before, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Nothing was being done.
Well, how could it take so long for the probate? The reason was that side was renting the property and collecting all the rent. So there was never a rush. Yeah, there was never a rush to get the probate finished.
Right.
So we get to a point where I said to you, look, what we have to do is force the situation. Right. We have to go and close on half of the property, the half that you have under contract.
Right.
So your side's thinking $70,000. And as we're seeing, there's a mortgage on the property.
Which we were not aware of. Exactly.
It was like $55,000.
At that time.
Yeah. And as I asked you about code liens and violations, they were about 20,000 or so, we thought at that time.
Right.
So we
Right.
thought maybe about $75,000 in stuff going on with it. I said to the closing attorney, look, we have to tie up half the house. And he said, well, look, I don't have to tell you, you can close on it, but you can't get title insurance.
Right.
Because you can't buy half a house and get title insurance on the entire property. But we took a shot. We said, okay, let's do it because we know what's out there in terms of code violations and liens and so on. And we did it. We closed. Now, before the closing, no, the 70,000 wasn't going to work.
Yeah, not even close. Went back, explained pretty much that the other side was not really going to play nice. They didn't really want to come to the table. And so we had to do something to make them come to the table and let everybody walk away as a winner. They didn't really see that at that time. Well, I said to the lady, look, this can drag out for a year, a couple of years even, or even longer. Or I could offer you this and, you can go Christmas shopping tomorrow if you like. And she took my offer. We agreed on, I asked her if she would take 20. She hung up the phone. After saying that she called me back, she didn't think about it. She didn't hang up on me. And then she said that if I could do 25, that she would be amenable to that. So we did 25.
Okay, so we came down from 70, or you got her down from 70 to 25.
To 25, yes.
And we closed. Closing cost with all the additional stuff was $26,400 because we didn't pay off the mortgage, didn't pay off any liens or anything else.
Right. That was just strictly for her interest.
Do you remember when we closed? I could look and see, but how long ago was it?
But I don't remember.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was a good 6 months ago anyway. Okay, now the issue came up. Oh, yeah, by the way, there's this $220,000 contract against the property.
Right.
So the other person can't sign it anyway.
Right.
And you had a great rapport with the other side until the investor who had the $220,000 contract got involved.
Right.
And kind of blamed us for being deal thieves. We didn't even know about him. He's kind of actually, maybe you could look at him as the deal thief. Because some of the things the guys do as deal thieves, and I'm not saying he was, is they run around, offer too much money, get it under contract, sit and wait, because ultimately it's out there and somebody's going to have to settle up or buy them out.
Right.
So the big issue really was she actually can't sell the property because she hasn't done her probate. She hasn't completed it.
Right.
So it turned out that the probate attorney that we worked with actually had to go and complete her side of the probate.
Right, right. And he's an excellent probate attorney.
So by now what's happened is when you go back and check on a payoff on the loan, you suddenly find out that the lender sold the loan.
Exactly. We were pretty much about to close after everything was all said and done. We just needed a final payoff. And we put in the request. We went through the whole rigmarole of getting third-party authorization again and everything else, but no payoff is coming through. We call again, come to find out that they just sold the loan to another servicer. So we had to go through the whole process again of getting third-party authorization. And that took a little while, but when we got that, we were able to move ahead.
Yeah, except the new amount came back as over $70,000.
That's right. It was like 55 before.
Yeah.
And it came back as 75. Don't ask me how. I don't think the mortgage was being paid like this whole year. So I'm sure that contributed, but to get it from 55 to 75, I don't think it was that much. There was some padding somewhere.
Yeah, well, they run it up with insurance. They have their own insurance companies and whatever, fourth place insurance. But ultimately, we got to a point where we said, okay, the other side's in agreement. The other investor sort of walked away from it because he couldn't do anything anyway with half of it. So we decided, well, we're going to list it. That's the easiest way to legally could. And we started getting offers in the 240, 50, 60, 270 area, as it turned out.
Right.
Because the 270 was a cash offer, we took it. And it sounds like, hey, that's not bad. What's happening? Well, it wasn't over. And what happened is the code violations had been kind of stacking up.
Yes.
And as we went into getting all the title work done, we set a closing date. I think it was out 3 weeks, something more than reasonable. But as we got closer to the closing, you had to start looking at what's wrong with the code violations.
Right.
The other side that had control of the property and was renting it did get the tenant out.
Right.
But they didn't mitigate any of the violations. Yeah, mostly trash and stuff, right?
Right. I don't know if they would know how to do that, but we certainly do.
So how many times did we get extensions before we actually closed?
I think it was like four extensions from our buyer before we could finally close because we were dealing with the lien mitigation.
So let's talk about the liens. You were deeply involved with these. You actually
Yes.
went down and saw the code enforcement officer, the head of the lien building department is what it was.
Mhm.
So talk about what kind of liens there were.
It was pretty much initially it was like junk cars parked in the property, but those were, long removed. It was debris around the property. There's a little, I guess, I don't know what they would call it here in Florida, but, in New York, it's an alley pretty much. It's an alley right behind the property. And there's people with mattresses, old chairs, garbage bags, old clothes, you name it, it was back there. And also the bushes, the shrubbery, it was just wild. And that's the reason that wasn't taken care of. So that's why the lien just kept stacking up and stacking up and stacking up.
Yeah, what happens with these alleyways is they were designed for trash pickup.
Mm-hmm.
The trash truck comes through there, picks up the cans.
The truck stopped coming.
What happens is other people come along and dump stuff.
Right.
They don't have any place to put it, so they dump the mattresses and everything else. Ultimately, the trucks can't get through the alleyway, so they go through, fine everybody wherever they dumped all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So how much were the liens? How many different liens were there? Do you remember? 3?
Oh boy, there were, it was actually more than that initially. A couple were rolled into one another. Initially, when I first spoke to the gentleman, he said, you have about $80,000 worth of liens. He had magistrate that they were trying to close. And I'm like, look, if this has to go to magistrate, is there anything that you can do? You can maybe get that lowered today. He took a quick look at it. He said it would not have to go to magistrate, so don't worry about it. He said he'd call me back the next day. He was able to call me back on Monday. And whatever he did, he checked to make sure that we weren't going to double pay for anything. And all of a sudden, that 80,000 came down to 20,000 because they were like double dipping almost. So when he took a look at everything, the 80 really came down to 20, which we'll take it. Came down to 20. But then we had to pay, I think, $4,700 or $4,900 in hard costs. Those are costs that can't be negotiated down. So when we paid that, then we're able to enter into what they call an amnesty program. And that's when you pretty much can beg and plead that whatever the remaining liens are, fines are, can that come down to something more reasonable so that we can close? Initially, it was $21,000 was what we were left with. And then that amnesty formula that they use, it worked out to be about 15% of that, plus some administrative fees.
So
however,
less than 4,000. Yeah.
Yes, less than 4,000.
It wasn't over yet.
Right, it wasn't over yet because they took a portion of that 21,000 and they took about close to $5,000 almost, 4 and change, close to 5,000, and actually put that on the tax bill.
Well, it's non-negotiable, but one of the things that happens is they put it on the tax bill so it's carried forward. And if you're going to buy it at a tax deed sale, you're not going to negotiate it. You're going to have to pay it. And typically what hard costs are is the city comes out and hires somebody to remove the trash, the cars, whatever it is, and it's called a hard cost. Now, why was it as much as $80,000? Because they just add stuff on. They may have had a daily fine for 2 or 3 years, $50 a day, whatever it was. Those are negotiable. Non-safety issues are usually negotiable. Nuisance issues is what they are. Right. So ultimately, though, after the amnesty and everything else, you got it down to less than $4,000.
It came down to less than $4,000. But when they added the taxes, and I said, hey, we're going to have to pay these taxes, they're due. At closing, this doesn't make sense. We already had an approval letter for our amnesty amount. So what the gentleman did was he, off of the 20,000, which was the base for our initial amnesty, he removed the 4,700 that was added to the taxes. So now our base was 21,000 minus the 4,700. So that new number now becomes our base for the amnesty. Lower number, 15% of that is a lower amnesty amount. So it wasn't a full wash. We weren't really compensated the 4,700, but it's something.
And if you're thinking to yourself, God, this is an awful lot of trouble, this is kind of typical of the deeper you dive, normally the bigger the profits.
Right.
Now, what I started to think about was about the partition. Kind of early into this, as we started talking to the other side, we said to them, come to the table. And they said, we don't have to come to the table. We got it pretty good. We're collecting $1,250 a month. I think they're getting around. They had no cost in the property other than maintenance, and they didn't do much of that.
No, not at all.
So I said to my attorney, okay, we're going to file a partition motion to the court in action. And what that looks like is the court gives a decree, so to speak, and it says sell the property and divide the proceeds. Now, that all sounds really good, and it really works, except for one thing. They treat it as a foreclosure. So it's a stress sale, to say the least.
Right.
So we expected an unknown thing. If it actually went to sale, we didn't know what we were going to get. And
Right.
think about it. If we hadn't gotten 270 and got 170,
Right.
it would have been catastrophic.
Yes.
So what happened is we kept saying to the other side's attorney, wake up, come to life here.
Mhm.
I know you like waiting on it, not doing anything, but if it goes to sale, a lot of stuff's going to happen.
Right.
So they came to the table, but ironically, we did have 4 postponements, and the buyer was gracious the first 3 times, and the fourth time,
Right.
they said, yeah,
Right.
don't close next Friday. We're not going to close.
Right.
So we did. Now, what was interesting about this was the other side had all kinds of expenses,
Mm-hmm.
and we had our expenses.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is some of those expenses were joint because they went towards the property. Other ones
Mm-hmm.
were on either side. Like on our side, we paid for the probate on our side.
Mm-hmm.
And on their side, I don't know what happened with that, but they didn't pay the attorney, but it was taken out of their side of the proceeds. So it literally took days and days to get everything ironed out about who gets what and so on and so forth. And they finally agreed, and we finally closed. And the net profit after all of those things happening on our side,
it was all just shy of being a 50-pounder.
it was a couple $100 shy of being $50,000.
Yes.
So was it worth it? Of course it was. Had it been $20,000, it would have been worth it. Now, yes, we had to jump through hoops, and Wayne worked on it for a long time. But the reality is, if you look at the number of hours of work in it, that's a pretty good payoff, right?
I've done a lot more work for a lot less money.
We won't talk about that. This was kind of a unique deal because there were so many twists and turns in it. It was like you'd set a closing date and just something would happen and happen and happen. For example, they sent the payoff letter from the city. It was incorrect. It hadn't mentioned 2 of the liens, right?
Right.
Okay. So the closing attorney said, I need the other 2 on there. And they agreed, the city agreed that, yeah, we just didn't put them on there. We will.
Right.
Oh, by the way, we're not coming to work next week because it's Thanksgiving. We're taking the whole week off.
Thanksgiving, yeah. Right.
It was a whole nother week's delay. Like if it could happen, it did. But let me ask you this. These are never scripted, but is there something that you took away from this? Everything's a lesson. But is there anything you might want to say to somebody?
I would say that persistence definitely pays. Don't give up when you're on a deal and it gets tough and you're wondering like, is it going to be worth it? Just don't give up. Just keep going, because in the end, it's going to be sweet. Just keep going. Yeah. Anything that's worth doing, anything that's going to be rewarding is going to be difficult. So I think that's why we're put here, to just solve problems. That's why we're here. So, have a good attitude about it. Like we said before, I've done a lot more for a lot less. So this is not a bad gig.
Okay. Any last comments?
Again, you know how I feel about you. I thank you for everything that you've done and everything that you will continue to do. It's wonderful having you as a mentor, Dave. It really, really is. It's the type of environment nowadays where, everyone has a podcast and everyone has a video and everyone has some advertisement. You really don't know who is who. But anyone thinking about joining the mentorship program, anyone thinking of, working with Dave Dinkle, don't hesitate. Don't think twice about it. Dave is the real deal. Trust me.
I appreciate that. This wasn't made to be a testimonial of that sort, but it's always nice to hear it because
Well, you asked me what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to say.
Not stopping you. All right. So one of the things Wayne does is you do predominantly mailings.
Yeah.
You guys that are out there doing mailings and not getting any results, I don't know. Wayne gets results. And I think one of the things that you have to understand about probates is it's not as simple as who shows up in the public records. Every one of those is a very, very deep dive into who is in the chain of beneficiaries, I'm going to say. Some are entitled, some aren't. I think you've had some have you had any where the beneficiary or beneficiaries are incarcerated?
No, there was one I was still working on, where someone is in jail, hoping to get that one on the contract and done. But there's one that I'm working on. The person is in jail as we speak.
Yeah. What's the longest it's ever taken you to get it from start to finish to get a deal done?
2.5 years.
Okay.
2.5 years.
I've said in some of my other videos, as I talk to students, especially one of the gals that's a student, she talks about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Her longest one is 5 years.
Wow.
And if you're thinking, well, I can't wait 5 years, you don't have to wait 5 years. What you have to do is put them in the pipeline.
That's right.
Follow up.
That's right.
The average investor quits way too soon.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going to happen to that property. Either somebody's going to pay too much for it, or you're there when they need you.
Right. Got to be the last man standing.
Yeah. Or woman.
Or woman standing. Exactly.
All right. Well, I thank you very much, as always.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.
We'll be
Tell
in touch.
Nancy I said.
I will.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Bye, Dave.